Hey everyone, it's Horror Free for All. Welcome to my first collab video on this channel. I've actually collabed with these fellows here on my Goosebumps Completionist channel before, and I love these guys to pieces so much. I wanted to include them on this discussion we're having tonight. And the discussion is Tales from the Crypt movies. And we're specifically talking about the one during the show's lifespan, not the old 70s ones, okay? Just so you know that up front. But the panelists here, in case you don't know these guys, they're very cool. Please go sub up their channels and give them some support. We're joined by the Horror Tavern. How are you doing tonight?
Yo, 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 people of the nights, none other than the Horror Tavern. I'm trying to collect hoes like the Crypt Keeper was in Demon Knight. That's where we all gotta be in life. But I'm doing good, man. I'm excited to talk about these movies. These movies are batshit crazy. I considered my life decisions after watching them, but I had a fun time. And I gotta say, as crazy as they are, sometimes it's good to get a little wild in life. So I think this is gonna be a fun review.
Oh, I think it will be too. And I'm also waiting for you to finally finish Tales from the Dark Side so we can get your thoughts on the whole show.
You can wait till my fucking funeral to do that.
All right, and then we're also joined with Metal Horror Bruce. How are you doing tonight, Bruce?
I'm doing pretty good. Hopefully everybody watching this is. If you want to go look at my channel, I talk about metal and horror monthly. So if you ever want to check it out, please do so. Cool reviews will come out for albums, movies coming out, anything. And also, I'd like to say that these movies are fucking horrible. So if I'm a little bit, crazy, that's just something you have to expect with these movies. All right, we're one of the films we're reviewing today has bordello in the title, and I think your mind can fill in the blank. So that's all I'm gonna have on that statement. But yeah, also sub up these guys. They're awesome as always.
All right, so yeah, let's talk about Tales from the Crypt. I don't know if y'all have seen the show or read the comics before. If y'all have, okay, so y'all haven't. Me and this show go way back to my, not my early childhood, but maybe around the age of 10 or 11. Once this station called the Chiller Network, it was a cable premium channel back in the day, had this show on syndication, and I caught a lot of episodes for the first time and on that station, and I kind of fell in love with the show that way. And these movies came way later in life. I never knew these existed, even though I was a '90s and early 2000s kid. I found them one day on HBO, and I think I watched Demon Knight, and I never watched the other ones. But when I told y'all that I wanted to watch these movies for the first time, really, to do these reviews, I wanted y'all to experience them with me because they have such a fascinating history behind them. And we can see evidence because, like I said, we're only talking about these attempts at making Tales from the Crypt movies when the show was out from the late '80s to the mid '90s, right? And I had y'all watch this movie because the real third Tales from the Crypt movie, Ritual, is so hard to obtain and find on the internet. Y'all couldn't find it, so we watched Two Fisted Tales, right, which was an anthology film made in 1992. It only aired one time on the Fox network, and the only reason why there's tapings on YouTube of it is because people archived it. It's been lost media, or it was lost media for many years. But all three of those segments, I think the segments were Showdown, King of the Road, and Yellow, were turned into Tales from the Crypt episodes, making this movie retroactively a Tales from the Crypt movie, kind of. Except you don't have the the guy in the wheelchair, the guy with the foul mouth talking shit to you in the segments, kind of like its own Crypt Keeper. So I'm gonna throw it to you guys. What did y'all think about this straight to TV movie, and why do you think that it might have failed, and why do you think that there could have been appeal to put it into the Tales from the Crypt show?
Well, based on the first two segments, in specific, I have to say I think this one genuinely failed because, well, sadly, it wasn't the most interesting thing. I think that this is actually kind of a hot take from what I know, but the first segment, Showdown, is actually pretty fun. I think we can all agree on that. but the second one kind of loses my attention. I often found myself kind of dazing off, getting bored. And as for the third one, it's kind of its own thing, and it apparently even won an Emmy. You said completion.
It won an Emmy for Tales from the Crypt, and I think it had some noticeable. I forgot who directed that one. I want to say it was Frank Darabont or maybe Richard Donner. Forget who exactly, or maybe it was Robert Zemeckis. I forget. But they won an Emmy for that for the show.
But yeah, I feel like, especially when you have only 3 segments, to I guess base your score off of as a critic, when one of them isn't very good, it heavily weighs down your score because, well, the third one, once again, I didn't think it was great when I watched it. I think BD also kind of thought the same, but like you said, it must have been good if it won an Emmy. So there's that. But what I like to kind of compare this to is the Creep Show movies. This is just in specific Creep Show 1 and 2, which is of course, as we all know, way better than the third, which kind of doesn't even have anything to do with these, but you get the point. Um, but these movies both break down the film into segments, kind of like what this does. And these actually have very solid stories, and, well, for pretty obvious reasons, George A. Romero and Stephen King were attached to these. So I guess you kind of have, kind of like, I don't know what the word is, but you have some expectations. That's what I should say for those movies, kind of compared to this, which is a TV special. Um, but I feel like these honestly just have more creative stories in general. Although I like the kind of Western take on this, I feel like this was kind of trying to be like Creep Show, which in general, I wouldn't say this is the best film we looked at. Probably around a 5 out of 10 score on my opinions here. But I will say that, um, sorry. I will say for sure that I would have rather seen these other tales, like these real Tales from the Crypt movies, that we're looking at, the Presents movies, do this type of creep show fashions formula rather than do a single story the entire thing. So I honestly think both of these movies we're looking at today, these other two, kind of drag. So that's my thoughts on Two Fisted Tales. I didn't think it was the most special thing, but it's fun. If you have time on your hands, I guess you can check it out if you'd like.
Yeah, and around that time in the early '90s, you had John Carpenter's Body Bags being a straight to Showtime movie, having a similar setup. You have a 3-story anthological movie on your hands there. That one's more horror, psychological thriller based. This one is going for that crime war story anthology and with some mild horror elements in there. But I want to save my opinions because at the end of the day, especially when we're talking about '90s anthology films, Tales from the Dark Side of the movie easily is the best one. I mean, that one is pretty much the real Creep Show 3, and we could talk all day about that. But for this one being kind of outside of the typical anthology genre that you saw at the time, I'll say I can kind of let some things slide with this, but I want to hear what Horror Tavern has to say about this movie here.
So for Two Fisted Tales, I think probably the main reason why it failed is that Creepshow and Tales from the Dark Side has really iconic stories in it. It has something in it that everybody can remember, especially when you focus on stuff like creature features, unique situations, and iconic kind of schlocky scenes that people can grip onto, which those scenes are even present in Demon Knight and Bordello of Blood, which makes them much more memorable than Two Fisted Tales. Two Fisted Tales has good stories, but they mostly like 2 out of the 3 segments feel like the slower parts, and maybe you can attest to this. It feels like the slower parts of Tales from the Dark Side episodes that we've seen towards the middle of like season 1 and 2, where they pretty much drag. They don't really have much plot to carry on a long runtime. And I think that really the only one that surprised me was the showdown. I actually thought the showdown was really good. I think that the main thing that stopped me from rating it higher was the fact that the story's been overdone a lot, but the acting was great. The Wild West setting was great. It had good action in it, and the actual tension and drama involving that bar scene where he started realizing where his life was, who these people around him were, and he started freaking out and panicking. I thought that was really well done. And the ending, where him and some allies kind of group together and overlook a certain scene, it was really well done. So I thought that that was a good start. But then you get into the second segment, which kind of felt like some typical drama, young adult horror stuff you see. If I can recall, I think Brad Pitt is in it. I may be wrong about that, but Brad Pitt is in there. This was before his career popped off that big, so I imagine he looks back on this segment and is not too proud about it. But it was okay. I probably give it like a 7 out of 10. It was just average, forgettable. And I honestly I don't give a fuck. That Emmy-winning section, y'all were high. Whatever people be smoking on Goodreads about Richard Lehman and Riley Sager, y'all all be sharing the same blunts when it come to these awards. That was not no Emmy-winning segment, man. I mean, it had a few good emotional things in it, but it was really dragging. And I'm surprised that that is the one that got accolades compared to the Showdown, which had a lot more of a cohesive story and felt like it had much more a bang to it. No pun intended, because it involves guns. So yeah, I don't know. I can see why it failed. I don't know why they decided to do that, especially when the Tales from the Crypt movies that we're about to talk about were a lot more wild, a lot more schlocky, a lot more creative, and that's why people remember them. So when you go for boring stuff that you would see in like mid to bad Tales from the Dark Side episodes, people aren't going to want to pay money to watch it. Like people aren't going to want to waste their time seeing it. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, and I said this in my review of Two Fisted Tales that in the context of this movie being worthwhile, here's the thing for me. If you're watching these for the segments, it's pointless because they were all put into Tales from the Crypt's TV show. So you don't need to go out of your way to watch this. If only for William Sadler's bit. And William Sadler, we have yet to still talk about him because he's the main star in Demon Knight. But he plays the Crypt Keeper of this Two-Fisted Tales universe of sorts in this movie. And he trash talks you, he shit talks you the whole way. He makes fun of you. He's like, hey, if you can stomach this, you can hang with me. He's making joke quips like that. And he's super fun. And I think it creates this ambiance where it's trying to be a different type of anthology. And I can appreciate it for that. It's almost in the same vein as Steven Spielberg's Amazing Stories from the 1980s, or even its revival. It's not trying to be all horror all the time. It's not trying to be crime or thriller. Sometimes it's more fantastical stories. Sometimes it's more fairy tale or, fantasy in nature. But these are more like those old serialized pulp stories. I get a lot of pulp vibes from this movie here, and I can appreciate it. Um, in my opinion, I do think that Yellow, if you actually sit down and you watch it all the way through, in the context of this movie, is clearly, in my opinion, the best one, next to maybe Showdown. The middle one, King of the Road, I have no idea what the hell they were trying to do with that story. I still don't. It's like some weird fascination story with this man named Spider obsessed with a police officer because he has a former street racing legacy and it's never really expounded on as to why. It's just there in the plot and he tries to get with the guy's daughter to get close to him. It's bizarre. It's just why. And the fun fact is Showdown and King of the Road were the only two stories in this film that were written for it. As a matter of fact, in the whole Tales from the Crypt show, where these two segments were later put into, I think they were the only two segments originally written outside of the EC comics themselves. Yellow was actually from the very first Two Fisted, or not, or maybe I should say, is it Two Fisted Tales, or it's one of those comic series? I forget what it is, but it was in the very first issue of that. I think it was Shock Suspense Stories. Yellow goes back to one of the earliest EC comics there is. So I can understand putting Yellow into here. But King of the Road, Showdown, you couldn't pick any other stories from the franchise you're trying to build. That's kind of why I think it failed. If you can't capture, by that point, there was a lot of hardcore archivist things going on in comic books. There was a huge step into archiving EC Comics. There was a huge step into re-releasing them because of the hype from Tales from the Crypt. People knew their comics history. And I guess seeing the translation on screen, like, hey, these weren't stories in the comics. What the hell are they doing here? They don't do that in Tales from the Crypt. That's one strike. Two, you don't make the stories that interesting. You just make these random, I don't know what the hell you're trying to do stories, and they don't capture an audience. They could be well made, they could be well acted, but they're kind of boring. That's strike two. And strike three is that you don't put enough emphasis on the marketing of it. It only aired it one time because I guess it bombed. They didn't keep at it with it, so they retroactively made them into Tales from the Crypt. You know, it's a learning lesson, and I can kind of see why they wanted to do away with the anthology formula because pretty much I think this one and maybe Body Bags were the last anthology films of the 90s for a while until like they kind of got brought back in like the 2000s, especially in the horror genre. It just, I guess it lost popularity, even though anthology shows were still like Tales from the Crypt by all means is an anthology show. On the show circuit, they were still popular, but on the movies, they were kind of falling out a little bit. So I can kind of see why. That's just my take. If I had to rate them, I'd probably give Yellow, in the context of this being a Two-Fisted Tail story and not a Crypt story, I'd probably give it like a 5 out of 5. I know that might sound high to y'all, but I like it quite a bit. Showdown, I'll probably give like a good 3.5 out of 5 stars, which is pretty good for this standard here. And then King of the Road is probably like a 3 out of 5, 6 out of 10. Story. But yeah, anything else before we move on to later on what would happen next? Okay, so to continue the timeline. So around this time as well, Robert Zemeckis, he was one of the lead producers and one of the people responsible for bringing Tales from the Crypt to HBO and also Two-Fisted Tales to Fox. He wanted to make Tales from the Crypt movies. And he pitched the idea out, I think, in the early 90s. And I think most of the reaction to it was they were kind of apprehensive of seeing Tales from the Crypt ascend to film. But he wrote this movie in mind to become a Tales from the Crypt movie, and that is Death Becomes Her. And it later became its own thing from Universal. And because of the success of this, based on the effects and how it won some Academy Awards for its effects, these effects later would be put into the Jurassic Park movie in 93. They were like, hey, maybe Zemeckis is on something here. We should gather up some scripts and start making Tales from the Crypt movies. So they gathered up 3 originally. And the 3 they gathered up, out of them, only one was made, which was the first film in question, Demon Knight, and the other 2 weren't. The other 2 were, I think, Dead Easy and Body Count. They got canceled after Demon Knight released because they had lack of faith. But Demon Knight came out in 1995 as the first officially branded Tales from the Crypt Presents movie. And this stars Billy Zane, William Sadler, and Jada Pinkett Smith. And the story is absolutely wild. And I'll let y'all start off with your reactions to it. What did y'all think about this first official Tales from the Crypt Presents movie? Do you think they started off on the right foot here? And yeah, whoever wants to start off. Go ahead.
I gotta say, this is probably the most batshit fucking insane plot line that I've seen in a while. I mean, this story is extremely memorable. I'll say that. It's extremely iconic, extremely memorable, but it's so crazy and so wild that I can see this being a strong promotion and start to introducing people to Tales from the Crypt. Because of the fact that they went so balls to the wall, people are going to want to find out what the show is about. And they're going to want to tune in and see, are the episode segments in the show as crazy as the movie? So I think from a marketing standpoint, it was very smart. And just watching it, even though it is all over the place and wild, I had a fun time. So I guess let's talk about it for those who don't know about Demon Knight. So basically, you have this guy named Breaker, who's played by William Sadler. And it starts off with him basically on the freeway. He's basically driving away from this guy who's chasing him, who turns out to be the Collector, who's played by Billy Zane, was it? They get into a car chase scene. He eventually runs out of gas. He swerves, and he starts taking out a lever-action rifle and shooting at the collector until the car eventually gets on fire and the collector is unfazed. He keeps driving, eventually goes into a collision, and there's this humongous, over the top Spielberg explosion. And when the cops arrive on the scene, Breaker has already fled the scene, but the collector basically tells him, hey, this guy is a thief. He took this antique item of value from me, and I need to go get it back. So we need to hunt down this guy wherever he is. He's very dangerous. Breaker ends up running away. He tries to steal a car, which has this close encounter with the kid who kind of rats on him. I think his name was Danny or something. And he eventually runs away and goes to this inn. And this inn is the most sleazy fucking random place you ever been to. There's prostitution. There's an old innkeeper who is just okay with any type of outlaw or wild person coming into the place. You got this older guy who shared a drink with Breaker that led him there. And you find out later that this older guy is, I don't know, some kind of wild military dude who was trying to blow up the postal office. He had grenades and guns and shit. He was about to cause a giant massacre. And you have this kind of guy who I think got fired from the mail office place, and he like simps for the prostitute, even though she has aggressive sex upstairs in his view, and he still is in love with her. This is a wild place, y'all. This is a filthy, wild place. And you realize that, Breaker's trying to hide from the police, and they eventually hunt him down. And when they do hunt him down, you get this really kind of odd tension between the collector and Breaker. And then you find out there might be more than meets the eye. Maybe these two are actually hiding a lot of information from the people around them, and this may be some ancient mythical war that's been going on for a long time, and it's all about to be revealed in the worst way possible to some basically innocent civilians. This story was crazy, y'all. I gotta commend William Sadler. I mean, he plays a great job with Breaker. I think he's trustworthy. He's kind of that quiet, very badass sort of guy. You have faith in him, you trust in him. He's very mysterious. And my biggest kudos has to go to Billy Zane. Billy Zane, as the collector, is a super fun, over the top villain. He's got this charisma, he's got this swag to him. He's very kind of suave and alluring in a similar way to what like mythical portrayals of the devil and Lucifer and those kind of figures are. But then he has these over the top scenes, which kind of remind me of like Jim Carrey or like Carl Nav from Trilogy, where he'll have these breakout performances where, like, let's say the drunk guy, he knows that the drunk guy is very much into alcohol and women. So he has this naked titty bar, which shows up and allures him. And he says, hey, man, I got this magic cocktail for you. Try it out. And he starts luring him in that way. He shows Jada Pinkett Smith these wonderful paintings and attractions of how she could be traveling. There's people's faces pressed against it in hands. And then he tries like rizzing her up. So it gets strange right there. He inherently blows off the arm of one of the characters and then comes up with a food platter plate with the arm on it, grilled and roasted, saying, yo, here you go. He's a wild character, man. And he's very intimidating, very powerful. There's some amazing, I think, prosthetic effects with demons. Their designs look horrifying. The monsters that this guy uses as his servants are genuinely scary. You have some scenes involving the little boy and a potential transformation scene in the attic. That was fucking horrifying. You have scenes with the prostitute, scenes with the old man. It's just really well done. And it reminded me of like the villains from the live action Scooby Doo movie, those kind of gross, brownish, skinny shapes, and they got that charred flesh, those glowing green eyes. And it's really wild, really crazy. And I enjoyed it. But I do got to say that there are some weaknesses to it. The plot is all over the place. So if you guys have ever seen movies like Who Framed Roger Rabbit or those kind of tales where it's just go gadget bullshit, random thing here, plot convenience here, move the plot forward, minor character study, random lore drop. That all happens back to back in this movie. So you just have to sit yourself in for the roller coaster and go along for the ride. If you try to pick this movie apart logically, you're going to dislike it more and more as it goes on. And Jada Pinkett Smith is good. I think that she's very important to this movie because, it deals with them fighting off demons from the abyss, which kind of explains her marriage with Will Smith. Kidding. I'm kidding. No, I'm not. I'm seriously. This bitch is toxic. All right, you stay away from her. But anyway, she does a good job. She's a good job playing that hero role. Towards the end of the movie, she kind of gets this redemption arc. There's some really absurd comedic scenes in here. There's a scene where they're eating dinner, and I don't know what the fuck William Sadler was eating. He was eating some fucking mayonnaise septic scum with ketchup in it. And then the prostitute and this guy named Roach start having the most aggressive bass boosted sex I've ever heard in my life. They are literally rocking the house like a F5 tornado. And the simp guy is just sitting there like fucking Jonah Hill from the fucking from any of his older movies. He's just sitting there wondering why he can't get with the girl. And then the police officer named Bob heads up to the room. He opens it, and the prostitute is straddling Roach with fucking electrical cords attached to his nipples, shocking him out of some type of kick. Yeah, that type of shit, bro.
And
Y'all,
no. And guys, fucking Cemetery Gates by Pantera is playing. Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. That has to be the worst fucking song pick I have ever seen in a scene in cinema history. Alright, that is a song that is sad, filled with emotion, and all you see is just this fucking girl zapping this guy's nipples. I had to add that. It's one of the worst things I've ever seen.
one of the craziest kinks I've ever seen. It's just so absurd, so funny. But yeah, man, that's this movie. It's all over the place. It's wild. It's crazy. It's absurd. But I had a fun time. Again, it's fun. It's schlocky. If you like schlock, there's a lot of that in here. If you like over the top fight scenes, there's that in there. And there's a lot of death and a lot of brutality and a lot of dark stuff that's riddled amongst this. Um, and I do have to say, my really only weakness with this one, aside from the all over plot, the lore behind Jesus's blood and God's ties to this stupid ass wild plot is the most random shoot in lore I've ever seen. You'll just get these random like PTSD flashes of lore, which takes you back to the ancient era when these demons were first there. And I couldn't help but laugh seeing these demons in freaking cloaks holding out their hands like they're bargaining with people. It just looks so over the top and goofy that it kind of took me out of it. But aside from that, this one gets a 7.8 out of 10. I think the plot is fun. I think you're going to have a good time. It's wild. But just make sure not to go in with a logical mind, because if you do, this one's definitely going to diminish for y'all. But I want to hear y'all thoughts.
Yeah, we'll pass it over to Bruce real quick. Hey, Bruce, what do you think about Demon Knight?
I mean, right off the bat, I gotta say this movie is extremely flawed. I mean, in my eyes, I think there is a lot of issues I have with it. Although it's still fun, some of my issues, I actually have a list here, include the following: bland characters, for example. There's a lot of characters that it kind of went through one ear out the other in terms of what I remember about them, and there's very little memorability within them. Some of the characters I barely remember anything about in general. I was looking over some screenshots on a Wikipedia thing. I was like, oh yeah, he was in there. That's my kind of issue. Another thing, hard to follow and confusing story. There was a lot of times where I'm like, what the fuck is happening? I just genuinely could not tell what was happening. I was so confused because the plot is just so all over the place at times, and in the blink of an eye, you could miss a major thing that happens in the plot that will never be explained again. Another thing, it feels kind of what I said in the last complaint. It feels really directionless. It honestly feels like this movie was made up as it was being filmed. Like that's how I felt while watching it. I honestly thought it's like one of those little crappy homemade movies you would make when you were a little kid on your little camera thing, and you're like, all right, lay down on the floor, and you're just kind of making up the plot as you film. I don't know if anyone else feels that here, but it just happened. And also, really rough acting. I really got to say that some of the acting in this movie is quite awful. Um, Although I did complain about the Pantera song pick, another thing I'd like to say is that the soundtrack is actually pretty good, including Pantera. Another thing is I actually really like the climax. I thought that both of the climaxes in these movies actually are pretty fantastic. I actually think that both of them very much boost the score and the overall enjoyability. And if I ever come back to them, I definitely will be looking at looking forward to these climaxes because they're just so. One of them's kind of more crazy. We'll get to that, but this one has like a lot of really in-depth stuff that you're like, okay, this is awesome. I think both of them are, even though one of them is obviously supposed to be taken seriously and the other one not so much. I actually wrote here overall, I think it is fun, but I really can't get behind a lot of these issues that I had. Um, Although, can I recommend it? Not personally, but I hear a lot of people loving this one, and based on these two guys' opinions, I think that you guys will probably enjoy it more than I did. I think I just had some issues with it that most people can probably get behind. I just couldn't. So that's my thoughts on Demon Knight from 1995.
Yeah, and that's fair enough because this is how I view it as a Tales from the Crypt fan. And let's call it out like we see it here. Demon Knight is not based on a EC Comics story. It's not from the Tales from the Crypt or Vault of Horror comics. It was a script written in 1987 that got passed around studio to studio. Hell, at one point, Charlie Band himself trying to fucking turn it into a Full Moon Features movie. And Lord knows how that would have turned out. But anyway, the fact that this for years was on the table, it took like 8 years to finally turn it into a movie, and the fact that they put a lot of the Tales from the Crypt charm. The opening of the film has the same opening as the show episodes. You have a cold open bit that is classic Crypt Keeper, voiced by the legendary. I always forget his name. Let me look up his name real quick. John Kassir, that's his name. His performance as the Crypt Keeper in this movie was fucking awesome. Okay, that cold open, holy shit. And it just brings this movie to life. And even the outro of it feels like a Tales from the Crypt episode. The soundtrack in this movie is beautiful. The acting is awesome from the lead cast here. I think Jada Pinkett Smith did a great job. This is honestly my favorite movie she's ever been in. And that's not saying much because I haven't seen a lot that she's in. But easily, this is my favorite movie just because I think Jerry Lynn, the character, I thought that she had a good arc. Going from like somebody that's just trying to blend in and being wallflower and becoming larger than life. I like that arc. I absolutely love William Sadler playing Breaker. He did a fantastic job in the role. And Billy Zane was the show stealer of the entire film. Bruce, you have something you want to add?
I'm so stupid for not mentioning this. Thank you. Uh, Jada Pinkett Smith, I don't think I've ever seen her in anything else, but she was solid. Sorry, I do not mean she is shit. The others were, and I also, like you guys said, Billy Zane is pretty fantastic. Definitely the best. Kind of like the star of the show here, besides the Crypt Keeper himself. Which I honestly wish, although of course he's not going to be in this, it wouldn't make sense. Well, in the actual story, I feel it's like I wish he was more entice. Like I wish he kind of would have broken up the movie, kind of like Joe Bob Briggs in a way. If you guys know who that is, I wish he kind of would have talked from time to time just to break up some stuff. But I can see why they wouldn't go that direction. But yeah,
Yeah, maybe breaking some fourth walls could have been kind of fun for his character. He could have been almost like a Deadpool type of villain, and who knows how that would have worked out. But I think that could have been fun. But I think most of the acting performances were solid here. Um, the concept is very much in the vein of Tales from the Crypt. And here's the thing: what I think is really cool and a big swing for this story. I know it's very hard to follow, but I feel like once you understand what's happening, it kind of clears up some of that. At least for me, the first time I watched it, I was like you. I had no idea what the fuck was going on. But the second time watching it, I kind of caught on to things I noticed the first time, and I started to glue myself in a little bit more. And it's pretty much a story about biblical times and how it's very much a story rooted in religion, and it has it's not even an undertone; it's very overtone in the film. Where Breaker, he's kind of like an apostle of God. He has a mark on his hand and marks the demon's 7 keys. There's 6 of the keys that have been found that when God created the earth and shed light and said, "Let there be light," it scattered the keys across the universe, moved the demons down, and he was able to create the earth and whatnot, or start Genesis. The demons at this point in time, up until the death of Christ, had found 6, and when Christ died, there was a 7th key, and they filled it with Christ's blood. And it said that kind of the reason why Christ was born was to shed the blood so they can warn off the demons with the key. So I think that was kind of a cool way to tie in biblical references to this. And once you caught on to that and how Jerry Lynn is pretty much going to be the next person to bear the responsibility of keeping the key on hold, and she's pretty much doing the will of God. It's kind of like a story that never ends, and it works in a weird way like that. And like BD said, the body horror in this movie, the prosthetic effects, holy fucking shit, man. Let's talk about the first kill scene you see in this entire fucking movie. Okay, you see the Collector punch his way through a police officer's head, and he rips off the head with his damn arm. That shit is gnarly as hell. One of the coolest death scenes I have ever seen in any movie. Jason Voorhees wishes he can pull off a kill like that. MPAA, fucking soil your shorts back in the 1980s. You could have had Jason Voorhees doing this shit a long time ago. BD, you have something you want to add?
No, just a quick little kid. By the way, he didn't just punch through his head. He punched through his head, and then it got stuck on his fist, and he was trying to shake it off of his arm, which adds better to the kill.
I know it was so over the top in the right way, but the concept with like what I think was one of the coolest concepts about this was kind of like a dungeon crawler story where the key acted like a portal, where if you poured some of the blood into a doorway, it acted like a barrier between the demons that the Collector, when he was cast outside, he now has the ability to this is the biggest issue I have with the whole film, is the fucking Collector's powers. It's Go-Go Gadget, I have this power, I have this, I'm pulling from this demon archetype, I'm pulling from this random shit, and he has plot armor out of his ass, because there's no rhyme or reason why he's able to do this other than he's a fucking demon. Okay, so he can cut his hand open, he has green blood, it resurrects demons out of the soil. Okay, that's one power. He can telepathically communicate with people inside of the house, even though there's a barrier that can kill him, and he's possessing them and being a demon inside of the house, even though there's barriers. Okay, there's plot convenience too. Third thing is he can fucking mind warp reality inside of your head and make you see shit like titty bars, and he can manifest himself into a comic book and pull a kid in and possess him that way and turn him into a goddamn demon. All right, whatever. I mean, a lot of random bullshit going on with this character, but what they're able to do with some of the sequences, I'll say this: the woman who plays the owner of the halfway house in the movie, that scene when her arm gets ripped off, yo, holy fuck! You see her bones break. You see the demon grab it and viciously rip it off. You see blood spewing everywhere. Holy fuck! They could not get away with this. You can tell that the mid '90s had come a long way from the MPAA of the '80s, because you know how much the Halloween films, Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, got slammed by the MPAA. This film did not fucking care. I mean, some of the shit they got away with in this movie was absolutely gnarly, and I have to tip my hat to them. And it does have its slow parts. It does have its mildly still confusing parts, like in terms of how all this shit has come together with the prophecy. There's a prophecy element dealing with like a rule of 7. There's always some 7, so there's 7 survivors, and all but one will survive. I mean, like, okay, that's cool and all, but how the fuck does that make sense to what we're being given here in the plot? It's just there. It's there so they can have an excuse to kill people, essentially. Which is, and it adds kind of to the fun of it, but you're kind of head scratching. You're like, what the fuck? But I honestly would give this movie an 8 out of 10. It's solid 4 out of 5 stars. It's an above average 90s horror movie. I should stress that, 90s horror movie. Especially when you look at how, like I said, you look at how far they came from the MPAA. You look at what the 90s horror genre was as a whole and all the stinkers they put out. this one is definitely above average for that time period. I thought it was a blast. Honorary tribute to the Tales from the Crypt show. BD, you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, there's a couple things I guess I wanted to add and build on. First of all, we'll get the most important part out of the way. I didn't mention this, but I agree with completionists. The opening and closing scenes of this movie with the Crypt Keeper are absolutely fucking fantastic. I love the idea of him being a movie producer and director on the set, and I love the fact that there's so many Tales from the Crypt references and canon kind of like nods that they do throughout it. The chick also in the bed scene was absolutely fantastic. I should have raised 1 star for it, but I was trying to be more reasonable. But she's amazing. All right. And also, I think that the seven in the actual story, I did actually enjoy the 7 stars and seven people thing because I immediately thought of the seven deadly sins involving demons. So I thought that that's what it was nodding towards, the seven sins. So I thought that was okay, but again, it's very loose. It doesn't explain that. That's just something that you would have to think about if you knew about mythology and demons and stuff. None of that is brought up. And one kind of not problem, but it I love Billy Zane. I love his performance as a villain. I think he's fantastic. But the actual details about what the fuck he is so loose that I was kind of scratching my head at certain points. And by the end of the movie, I enjoy that aspect. But at first, I thought he was the devil. I thought that, okay, this guy is the devil. He's able to bleed and create these portals that open up all these lower level demons. He can do, again, reality warp. He can do fucking Naruto genjutsu, mess with your mind and shit. And then he says at a certain point when he's talking to Jada Pinkett Smith's character that he's looking for a promotion down in hell. And I'm like, wait a minute. This guy is not the devil? He's a servant? And then he says that, all upper level demons can do this shit. And I'm like, okay, bro. I knew hell was overpowered, but Jesus Christ, how are these apostles of God supposed to beat these guys if all upper levels of demons just have go gadget bullshit? And then by the end of the movie, when he's defeated, you then see another collector trying to get onto a bus, which Jada Pinkett Smith luckily does something about. And that to me, I thought was pretty interesting. I enjoyed it. But again, I do have to agree with completionists. There are some things that you just kind of have to assume and just let it go because then it's going to enhance your enjoyment of the movie. But there's a lot of power dynamics, story dynamics, character dynamics that they would have been okay, except that the writers kept going, another one. DJ Khaled, another one, another one. And it just slowly digs a grave to anybody who's used to looking for a story through a cohesive, logical manner. And that's kind of what I have to say about that.
Great points. I like the fact that you brought up those things. Bruce, oh, you want to have something you want to add?
Just really quick, so we don't spend too long on just this one. But I honestly feel like with this movie in particular, I feel like this actually tries. Now that I'm just randomly thinking about it, I feel like it almost tries to do kind of like an Evil Dead style thing. Of course, obviously different in a lot of areas, but there's like the mythology parts of it that you kind of get to see in both movies, honestly, from the 80s. There's like character similarities, surprisingly. I don't know if any of you caught on that, but there's also just random things that feel similar, like, kind of this place in the middle of nowhere. We got a certain set of characters. It almost feels like they were trying to have like a more mid 90s approach to this, except obviously more schlocky, which is shocking to say. It's more schlocky than Evil Dead, but uh, one that, two, way more sex and just like violence in general, and just kind of making it more fucking weird and crazy. So that's just one thing I randomly thought of. I don't know. I'm probably just rambling, but
Yeah, I can see the similarities to that. And I also see some similarities to Peter Jackson's Dead Alive, or Brain Dead as it's called in the UK, where you have like certain characters that have plot armor and the rest is are victims to the plot, but somehow they end up like victorious and ending up in a wild ass climax. It's very much like that. I could totally see that. I think Evil Dead kind of popularized that trope in horror, where you just have these like over the top scenarios that no normal person would survive, but somehow these average Joes they survive it, and they fucking take something down larger than life and way larger than themselves. That's the Ash Williams effect there. I do think that's going on with Jerry Lynn and Breaker in some ways. But like I said, this is way more biblical than Evil Dead ever tried to go to, at least at that time. Maybe Army of Darkness was probably as most prophetic as it ever tried to be in that point of the franchise. So I definitely think it has that '90s swing. You start out with Evil Dead, and then you swing over to trying to modernize it and make it more schlocky, make it more over the top and ridiculous. I could totally see that comparison. Because you're trying to outdo what came before it. That's what you're trying to do. Make it more
Exactly.
ridiculous, more over
And
the top.
sorry, I actually feel like they kind of took that more ridiculous standard and really fucking blasted it up for the next movie, which we'll talk about in a bit. Because my God, I'm just
Okay.
gonna pass this over.
So yeah, we might as well move on to the next movie because this one has its own history. So moving along in the timeline of Tales from the Crypt Presents movies. So after Demon Knight came out, we've already kind of touched on this. Dead Easy, which was actually teased at the very end after the credits on this, they announced it to the audience that Dead Easy is going to be the second movie. Well, it got canceled. Same thing with the original third intended movie, Body Count. What happened was Robert Zemeckis now had to find a second film. Well, he ended up finding Peter Jackson. We've already brought him up because he made Dead Alive. He was kind of a smaller filmmaker at the time. He hadn't really hit the success with Lord of the Rings or King Kong yet in the 2000s. But he had this idea for a movie that would end up becoming The Frighteners. And Robert Zemeckis really wanted to make that the second Tales from the Crypt Presents movie, but he had a change of heart after a few weeks after the finalized script came in. He's like, let's make this its own thing. So he started looking for a second script instead for the second movie, and he ended up finding a script written by Quentin Tarantino, From Dusk Till Dawn. So he found the script for this. We all know this movie. At least a lot of horror fans know this from the '90s. It's probably one of the more prolific '90s vampire films. This was going to be Tales from the Crypt Presents 2. Well, to make a long story short, Zemeckis, after wrapping up filming with The Frighteners, was offered a job at DreamWorks, who wanted to, if you don't know, at the time, DreamWorks was not a film, company by any means. It was mainly a video game producer. They wanted to get into films. They wanted to hire Robert Zemeckis to build them a movie empire. And Zemeckis was going to leave Universal, so Universal to keep Zemeckis around, they sold off From Dusk Till Dawn over to Miramax, and the rest was history. And they decided to scratch his back and make a movie that he wrote after college that was supposed to be a vampire sexploitation movie. And he wrote this in the 70s, mind you, so keep that in mind. And what we ended up getting instead of From Dusk Till Dawn and The Frighteners was Bordello of Blood. Robert Zemeckis' first film I think he ever wrote. And this film was absolutely wild. You would not expect that. It's kind of a far cry, in my opinion, from Demon Knight. I guess I'll take this one over first because I haven't done it yet. So this movie, for what it's trying to be, it's everything that you would imagine 70s sexploitation vampire flick to be. I mean, it's called Bordello of Blood. You're going to expect, because it has Bordello in the title, a bunch of naked prostitutes, and you're going to be right here, okay? So unlike its predecessor, Demon Knight, it doesn't really start out with a Tales from the Crypt open. It doesn't really start out with a Crypt Keeper thing. It kind of starts out with a prologue of sorts, where they're deep in the jungles of South America, these explorers, and they end up in this pyramid type of location, and they find the bottom of it, and they rope themselves down, and they find this tomb of this ancient vampire named Lilith. And now Lilith is played by the gorgeous Erica. Hold on, what's her name? Angie Everhart, not Erica. Angie Everhart, and she's the redheaded Lilith in the movie. And this one explorer has brought part of this vampire Lilith's heart to reincorporate back into her chest. When this happens, there's a gruesome bloodshed, but there's some type of artifact that this explorer is carrying that may or may not look like the key from Demon Knight, that kind of gives him some power over Lilith. So then it cuts into the Crypt Keeper bits, and we have William Sadler playing a mummy hanging out with the Crypt Keeper, which is always fun to see. And the Crypt Keeper is talking about Bordello of Blood, how this is his new film, whatnot. It kicks on the rest of the story. Fast forward to to the present time, at least of the time of the film, and you have this woman and her brother who are total opposites. This one woman, the woman, she's like a news anchor at a news station, and the brother is some punk goth kid played by Corey Feldman, who was in Lost Boys. So now he's in another vampire movie in the 90s. Well, he's a horny guy, and he's off with his friends at a bar, and they're looking to get laid. Well, this one dumbass at the bar says, hey, look, hey, there's a secret bordello in the back of this mortician's house. All you have to do is go up to this house, say a password, and he'll let you into the bordello, and you get to see all these beautiful women and have all the sex you want. So they go to the mortician's house, they say the password. There's a weird scene with a coffin where they get taken down into the bordello lair, and you see nothing but boobies everywhere, and non-stop boobies for about a good portion of minutes. So if you're a skin freak out there you go. This might be the movie for you. Well, let's just say the vampire Lilith from the prologue is there. And you already know what to expect. Probably all these ladies are vampires. And let's just say it's implied that something very bad is going to happen to him, at least Corey Feldman's character, because we saw what happened to his friend, involving a tongue and a heart. Let's just say that. Well, his sister now has noticed that her brother's missing. She goes and hires a guy named Rafe, who's a private detective, and he's played by Dennis Miller. And Dennis Miller is now given the task to go and investigate what happened to this man. And throughout the rest of the movie, he starts to pick up the breadcrumbs of what happened, finds out the real secret to this bordello himself, realizes there's some connotations on how to handle this and what is going to be necessary to make the right calls and all that to handle it all. We see some other vampire alum like Chris Sarandon, who played the titular vampire in Fright Night from 1985. He's playing a preacher in this movie that runs a church that might be a front for embezzling money for this bordello. It's a very odd story. And we get some batshit climax involving super soakers and holy water with Dennis Miller and Chris Sarandon. Absolutely batshit. Bunch of just naked women, body parts flying everywhere. And then we get a pretty cool graphic climax and a corny ending. And then Tales from the Crypt sends you off with the classic Crypt outro that the show had and ends the movie off there. So for this one being the true second Tales from the Crypt movie, I can't say that I am kind of depressed that we got this instead of some other ideas that I've seen on Dead Easy or even Body Count for that matter. I'd much rather would have had From Dusk Till Dawn because this is just I think even for Tales from the Crypt standards, this movie was just really it was almost too sleazy for its own good. There are some sleazy stories in Tales from the Crypt. One of the classic examples I can think of is that this man, one of the episodes, one of the earliest seasons, he has this infatuation or this horniness for his neighbor, and he constantly imagines that she's naked and like wants to be in like fuck him essentially. And he gets this potion from this guy that has this camera in their apartment complex, and he gives it to her, but he doesn't know the side effects of it all, and she becomes so obsessive with him that it drives him to want to kill himself. Well, the twist is she kills herself too, so she can torment him in the afterlife because she's that obsessed with him. It's that kind of sleazy, but turned up way to 11 because we're going to the exploitation realm. Not saying that From Dusk Till Dawn didn't have its exploitation elements to it, but it was more action focused, and it definitely played more into the horror side of things than this did. This was just played up for mostly comedy gags and to show Angie Everhart's body as much as possible and naked boobies everywhere. If that's your thing, fine by you. Your prerogative and all that. But story, it ain't jack really. There's a bunch of just nonsense happening for most of the movie. You got this mildly interesting mystery plot, but the problem is you already know who the vampire is. You already know what the shtick is. You already know what there needs to be done to settle everything. So it becomes kind of redundant after a certain point. You're like, okay, can we get on with this shit already? And then, when it does click on near the final act, it gets really fun. Um, I would honestly say that because of how rough the movie kind of feels at times, this is kind of leaning in that bad territory. But for me, I think it's mostly a so bad it's good kind of experience. And I say this as a Tales from the Crypt fan. This feels like a sleazy, just weird offshoot episode. Still feels in that vein, but not quite as good. But since the climax is so much fun, and because there's so much just nods to vampire film and you can see the love there, I'm a lot more fair on it than I think other people would be. I'd probably give this like a 7 out of 10. But that's with an asterisk. That's not an average 7 out of 10. That's a so bad it's good 7 out of 10. And that's not the same, at least in my terms. But that's just my thoughts. I'll pass it over after that long-winded thing to whoever wants to pick up Bordello of Blood, because I know y'all have some fascinating opinions. Bruce, why don't you start us off?
So I want to clarify to all my viewers that I am a horror review channel, not a teenage sex comedy review channel. Okay, I'm a horror, not horrors, horror review channel. Now that that's cleared up, let's get into what I wrote down. This film is fucking insane. Nothing feels even somewhat sensible, and it even has a weird creep show 3-esque comedy vibe that does not work there nor here. And that's really all I gotta say, but of course I'm gonna add some other things. Let's begin with the obvious. Acting performances, what the fuck? I don't even have to speak on that. If you have seen these movies, you will know. If you know, you know. I'm not gonna alliterate. Another thing, boobies, they're nice to see. Alright, but I want some stuff to balance them out. This, I don't even sense horror. I mean, all right, I'm sorry. I might be a little bit dirty-minded here. I'm not focusing on this chick freaking ripping this guy's heart out. I'm looking at those tits, bro. I'm sorry. I can't focus when all you see in this entire movie, it takes up probably an hour or so, is just a bunch of boobies. And that's fine, but it really gets tiring after a while. It's not as fun to watch when you just have so much of it. So, can I really say much besides, like I said, act performances, weird, like really unnecessary and weird. There's also just minor things that make no sense. And honestly, I thought that the first one, sorry. I think that this one actually has cleared up some things that I had issues with in the first movie. Some things being, characters. They're not as bad, surprisingly. I actually like the main here. Uh, I think that the acting has gotten better. I'll be honest, and they've hired way better actors, in my opinion, better known ones, as you said, Corey Feldman. Whoever this main actor is, he definitely has experience because he was pretty good. And I actually felt like this didn't have any confusing story or plot. It wasn't. It didn't feel directionless. I feel, but I also have a lot of issues that kind of, coincide, if that's the right word, with the original and kind of make this level to it, if not even worse. I feel like there's just a lot of things in this movie that I feel drag, and nothing's really fun after a while. I feel like every single time I was watching, because I think I had to actually watch this over like 3 different time periods. I feel like there were times where I just got so, kind of worked up in what the hell was happening, because it's just like it's one of the weirdest things ever. And I will be honest, at least it gives you more time to process it, but it almost gives you too much time. And at that point you're like, you just kind of want this thing to end. I didn't have that much fun with it, honestly, which I really wish I could have. But you know once again, the climax is really fun. And it's so good that, wait wait for it, you can't give names for. I thought it was awesome. I think the climax, honestly, does everything this movie tried to be, but better. And just actually way better. I think that the climax doesn't even deserve to be in this film. I think this film is genuinely terrible, besides a few standout performances and the climax, which is just fucking insane. I have to alliterate on that. I feel like this has to be one of the craziest things that has ever happened in cinema. I don't know what I watched, and after watching it, I honestly felt like I needed to sleep because it was insane how just what the fuck kind of moment in movie history, man. I'm sorry. I really got I got to express my feelings towards this. It's one of the worst but like best at the same time things I've ever seen in my life. This entire movie. So, because of the climax, I'm gonna be generous and I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 10. I thought that it works when it works, but 80% of the time it doesn't. It's lucky it even gets that score. Although I can say that people should at least experience Demon Knight, no, do not watch this. It's not easy to come across. One, two, not worth your time, and three, don't pay money for this, man. I mean, unless you find this at like a garage sale for $1 or something, you're not gonna have a fun time. Maybe, but you're not gonna. If you're wanting horror, you're not getting it here. Yeah, that's really what this kind of comes down to. I feel like there's just a lot of missed potential here. And for what I actually was somewhat intrigued into, and I was wondering what was going to happen, just felt like the same old after a while. Couldn't get into it. And I have genuinely even bigger issues with this than I do with the first film. So,
Yeah, one thing I want to say, one of these movies, Demon Knight and Bordello Blood, is actually 5 minutes less than the other. Which one do you think is the longer movie?
Bordello.
Bordello's the shorter one. And that should tell you how much the plot drags in it, because I thought it was the longer one myself. You could have fooled me. Bordello Blood is 5 minutes less longer than Demon Knight. And it feels like the longer of the two. And also, I forgot to mention this. I think BD can touch on this. We have more Go-Go Gadget random bullshit with the villain, Lilith, in this movie. I forgot to mention this, but I thought it was hilarious when this shit would randomly pop up. Unlike other vampires, she can shove her fucking tongue like Mr. Fantastic down people's goddamn throats and rip out their heart through their goddamn throat. What the fuck? I mean, Jesus Christ. That's random as shit to see in a vampire movie. I've never seen that before, and I can kind of applaud that for being random, but yeah, what the hell? Two, she has this like aging thing involving, her abilities. She needs to eat hearts and stuff to keep young. Is that ever a trope in vampire? Like, I've never heard of vampires eating hearts, and that's like randomly done. And then she has like her servants, the bordello prostitutes. She's basically a pimp where she's like, here, you start them up for me, baby, and I'll come and finish them off. Like, it's weird sexual tension with Lilith and all these women too. And then to make matters worse, when Dennis Miller's character comes in, Rafe's character, and she's trying to tempt him because he has a rare form of blood that she's like intoxicated with. She randomly goes into his mind and says, I'm your fantasy girl. And she starts doing a cheerleader dance for him, thinking that that's going to like impress him. And I'm just like, what the fuck is this shit coming from? And it's not only that, you have the random explorer guy from the prologue. He's randomly a little person, which I don't have a problem with, but it's never really done up in a way that you would think. It's kind of like, oh, they casted the guy because he's a good performer and all that, but he's hardly in the fucking movie. And when he's there, you really don't understand what the fuck he's doing with this key and why the hell the preacher has the key in his church. It's never explained why that is. And the whole fucking Ponzi scheme with the church reverend guy, played by Chris Sarandon, pocketing this money and how he had no idea it was coming from a vampire brothel makes no fucking sense. Like, it's just so forced in there. Go-Go Gadget random plot shit. Bruce, you have something you want to add?
I don't know how I missed on this, but I feel like now that you've said it, vampire tropes. Yes, vampire tropes do get tiring, but I think we kind of have to agree here that one of the reasons this movie is bad is because it tries something different for once. I know that's blasphemy, but if we really think about it, when has a vampire story really been good when they try to incorporate all these weird elements into it? Besides any teenage girls, does anybody like Twilight? Fuck no. And nobody's gonna like this either. That's kind of my thoughts on why this movie's so bad. I feel like that's a genuine reason that this movie is just not good. I think it's poorly made, poorly executed, the whole ordeal.
Yeah, and the plot's all over the place. I want to hear BD shred this movie a little bit. So, BD, let's hear your thoughts. You've been really quiet, and I know you have a lot to say about this.
So this movie, first of all, the script. This is Richard Lehman's wet dream, bro. Richard Lehman writes hornier shit than this. This plot is literally similar to Traveling Vampire Show. I just read it. That was a book that got a bunch of accolades. It's a little bit less horny than this one, but it also deals with the same thing. A femme fatale kind of vampiress. You got all these horny vampires in this movie, and it just had his sort of flair to it. But I'm gonna be honest. I gave it a 5.8 out of 10. Now, why is that? Because, well, 5 points immediately come from the actress who plays Lilith. Listen, man, she's bad as shit. I'm not gonna lie to you. I already slid in her DMs. Whoever is with her right now, shout out to you, but also fuck you. I'm sending the bomb your way. Listen, man, she bad as shit. I don't blame the dude, the brother, for going to this, bordel. I mean, I did blame him, but then when I saw Lilith, I was like, you know what? Fuck it, bro. We might have to do the tongue shit. I just let her take my heart, bro. Listen, man, she bad. She does a good job acting for what she got to do. And honestly, she was a fun villain. I gotta say that she plays up the vampirist role pretty well. For what her role is supposed to be. I did appreciate Rafe. I think Rafe is a fun detective kind of character. He's actually pretty funny. He's got some good quips and good personality to him, and he's actually pretty interesting. Um, I think the preacher, the fake ass Joel Osteen, he's also pretty good too. I think he's got some charm to him. He's a little bit funny. And I think that his Ponzi scheme is really random as fuck, but it did kind of help the plot be a little bit more cohesive. But listen, man, this movie has a lot of negative. Let's go down the motherfucking assembly line, bro. Get Henry Ford's ghost up in this bitch. All right, first of all, the Spanish accents in the beginning of this movie, motherfuckers, I've heard better Spanish accents in the Spy Kids franchise than I heard in the beginning of this movie. They were fucking awful. And this little man, all right, I mean, listen, he's a decent actor, but he randomly took them to this fucking Dora the Explorer treasure chest, found this dead vampiress, and he randomly has her heart in 4 pieces. And apparently, these pieces magically come back to one, living piece. He puts it inside of her, reanimates the corpse, and then he gains control over her with the same key from Demon Knight, which is never explained, is no more than just a nice little reference, yet it has the same kind of powers and prestige that the demon key from the previous movie had. So it's like this loose tie-in. Maybe it's one shared universe. I don't know. But that's just the beginning of the film. Then you get to the fucking sister and brother, man. The brother is the most horny sleazebag I've seen. Again, Richard Lehman's wet fantasy. That's a prime main character for him right there, and one of his books, and it's in this movie. He's really just sort of emo. He's punk rock. His sister being absurdly religious is funny to me because they're complete polar opposites. And you have this barroom scene where he's throwing darts at his friend's ball sack, and I was like, what the fuck is going on here? And then you got this Chicago meth head that's at the fucking bar. And you know what? He's actually a good actor. You know why? Because I was genuinely unnerved by his performance because he's loud as shit. He fucking goes up to the screen and goes, you want a nice piece of ass, man? I'm like, what the fuck? Who got paid to act this way, man? You imagine getting paid? Imagine your mom goes to the screening of this movie and sees that you were able to pay the water bill because you went up to the screen and went, You want a tight little pussy boy? Like, no, no, man. The writing in this movie is not good. And then you actually get to the bordello, and it's pretty interesting. You know, you have this mortician. This mortician, I don't know if y'all caught this. He looks like the guy from Scary Movie 2 with the little fucked up hand in the mashed potatoes. He looks like him, dog. He looks like him a little bit. And he's got the same sort of eccentric personality. You have to go in this Disney coffin ride down a fucking furnace to get to the bordello. And then it's a titty fest. It's just full of titties, which I can't complain. But the mystery is given up right there because as soon as you get one glimpse at the women, they got clear as day vampire bite marks all across their neck. So there's no mystery. There's no suspense. It's completely ruined right there. And then my baby girl Lilith comes in. I'm like, hold up now. We're going to have to raise the score because something else is raising right now. All right, this is a prime movie at the moment, okay? She should have played Maleficent. I don't care, bro. Avery Everhart, she should have played Maleficent. I think she does a good job with the strong female role, the strong female villain, and she still looks good even as an older actress. So she could have played Maleficent. She does a great job being intimidating. And you basically get this death scene involving one of the characters that is very fucking obvious. And again, the mystery is gone. Then you get to the main girl, this religious girl. She has no personality. She has no character development. She has no interesting character. It's literally the most bare bones fucking character you can have. She's religious, she's a good girl, and guess what? I saw the actress and how she looks now. No offense, ma'am. You look like one of the demons from fucking Demon Knight. All right, you did not age well. I don't know what happened. I'm sorry, ma'am. All right, Avery Everhart got my heart. Whatever this lady got, you take that back. We don't need you. Rafe comes in, he spices up the story. He has the personality. The preacher has the story. You got this whole scheme going on, but it drags. Again, completionist said that Demon Knight is 5 minutes longer than Bordello. Bordello drags. The plot goes nowhere. Again, like Richard Lehman's books, the plot goes nowhere. It just drags ass for 80% of it. And then you get this awesome climax, this awesome, fantastically fun climax where you basically get a buddy cop scene with a shootout with super soakers. I mean, Nerf or nothing, bitches. They're fucking vaporizing these vampires. You got all this schlock, this amazing gore. And to put the cherry on the sundae, you got Ballroom Blitz, dun dun dun, Ballroom Blitz. You got this fantastic music playing. It's fun. It's over the top. You enjoy it. And then you get to Lilith. And this is where Lilith, she has a good character, but her importance goes down the drain because you got Rafe going to BDSM traps to take out the other vampire servants. Like he ties up one of them to a BDSM trap and then leaves them there. You got the fucking Lilith is able to shapeshift. That's a plot line. She's able to shapeshift out of nowhere. She's also able to manipulate people's minds like the Collector, but she turns into Marilyn Monroe, a cheerleader. She then transforms into the main character and seduces him. And apparently Rafe has got fucking he must have completed No Nut November like 10 years in a row. His fucking game of concentration is immaculate. Fantastic. The man is peak monk level, bro. No one can beat him. He's able to just defy Lilith at every single obstacle and thing she throws at him. And then you have a laser beam at the fucking church that's being broadcasted. What is the point of this go-go gadget James Bond Austin Powers laser beam other than to be a plot convenient matter to take down Lilith? And it doesn't even beat Lilith. You just get this dragged on climax, this dragged on plot, and then it finally resolves itself into a twist ending. That is the stupidest twist ending I've seen in recent years. Let's just say that in the world of vampires, biting below the belt is not off the rule list. And that's how the story ends, man. This story is fun at points, it's sleazy, it has schlock in it, but it drags. The plot goes nowhere. A lot of the characters are trying their best to work with the script that they have, but there's only so much you can do. when people are just kind of sitting at the theater, kind of like scratching their heads. They're kind of, at home on the couch thinking, what the fuck exactly is going on? And, you're just wondering to yourself, what was the purpose of this movie? What were they trying to go for here? I know they're trying to make exploitive content. I know they're trying to make this whole femme fatale kind of villain, but it goes nowhere. You have three different types of villains: the preacher, the vampirist, and then the midget. Sorry, this is what it is. And it goes nowhere. You don't know who actually is the villain at the end of the day. And the demon key that you think should play an important role becomes excluded out of the plot at a certain point. So then you start wondering, what actually is the point of this movie? Does it tie to Demon Knight? Does it not? And yeah, man, 5.8 out of 10. I think it's okay at parts. I think it has fun moments, but at the end of the day, it's just so goofy and over the top, you can't take it seriously. And if it was an insult to injury, I just want to highlight two scenes that made me literally have a lobotomy on the spot while watching. First of all, the mortician starts fondling dead women's bodies and going beep beep on their nipples. And then as he's going down below, he cuts open their stomach and she poots some intestinal gas. And the mortician goes, "What's that perfume you got?" I'm like, oh my lord, somebody got paid to write that in the script. Y'all are not slick. And then the brother, he has a scene later on. I forgot your name, my man, Corey Freeman. Shout out to you. You were in the Lost Boys, the Goonies. You are down fucking atrocious, bro. I don't know what bills you needed to pay to get in this movie. I feel bad for you, my guy, because he has a scene where his sister is basically about to be stripped naked by the main villain, and he starts getting horny over the shit. He starts getting excited, and there's no reason for it other than you're supposed to think his mentality changed. I don't know if that's supposed to be intimidating, but Alabama type beat is not intimidating me, my friend, and it's not helping out the plot right now. So this movie gets a what the fuck award. I haven't done that before. This gets a what the fuck. If Go Go Gadget bullshit was the movie, this is the movie. And it's not like Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Who Framed Roger Rabbit was fire. It had at least some sort of payoff. This movie has no payoff by the twist ending, other than the fact that R34 artist got a lot of material out of Jessica Rabbit, and I got a lot of material myself out of the Lilith, man. That's all it is. That's all there is to this movie. That's all I got. And yeah, man. Do I suggest you check out the movie? Not around your fucking parents, maybe, but if you get drunk or high or hit the bong or eat an edible or get on LSD, yeah, watch this movie. You're gonna have the time of your life. Just make sure to be fully clothed around your boys. I don't want to hear any of your stories down in the comments down below, please.
Yeah, a few things I want to add. I think Robert Zemeckis has a fetish for redheads and red dresses, because that's a running gag in a lot of his movies. I mean, Jessica Rabbit. I mean, the movie we talked about, Death Becomes Her. Goldie Hawn's a redhead in a red dress at one, and I think in a red dress at one point. He has a thing for that. And Angie Everhart, redhead in a red dress in this movie. I don't know if that's just his thing, but yeah, it's kind of weird to see that running gag and everything. Back to the laser projection thing. I think that was just supposed to be like a normal laser projector that has the cross on it. But the part of the story that where you needed to split Lilith's heart in 4 sections, the cross will do that because you got the top, 4 pieces, whatnot, and you have to aim it straight for her heart. I thought that was kind of clever, but like you said, plot convenience. And the fact that they had to turn it up all the way to get maximum brightness is insane. Like, why? If she's a vampire, she's allergic to fucking crosses, just put a damn cross on her. Why do you got to spend this whole 3-minute buildup of this bullshit, turning up the maximum capacity of the projector? It just makes no fucking sense. Let's talk about some throwaway plot lines of this movie, because there's so many different ones here. You got the whole preacher guy singing, playing along guitar, making like some Joel Austin fucking TV show. Then you had the reporter wanting to do an expose because apparently the fucking church is like embezzling money from this bordello. and then you have the throwaway plot of them uncovering like vampire footage and like, oh, Lilith was here. I swear she was, but now she's not here. And like they're trying to capture like all this bullshit on camera. It eats up so much time of this fucking movie, and it never goes anywhere. It never goes anywhere because we already know the fucking mystery. Okay, that's what I was getting at beforehand. What makes this movie so infuriating and why I think it's like a traditionally bad movie is that it doesn't lay out its plot very well. The prologue spoils who the main villain is. The first time you get into the bordello, we already know what the fuck is going on there. And it makes the whole rest of the movie like, come on, get to the fucking point. Why are we going through all this shit where these characters have to discover what we already fucking know? Why can't we just have a ride with them going to the bordello? Like, I much would have rather seen the whole movie basically centered around the bordello. Lean into that. Make the mystery in and around the bordello. Maybe her whole fucking master layer is there. You can just build onto that. Build onto the mythos of Lilith there. Why are we spending all this time in throwaway plot lines? It's fucking infuriating. Bruce, do you have something you want to add?
I cannot believe I forgot to mention this again. Before call, I actually mentioned this. So, I actually think that this movie, believe it or not, even with the bordello stuff, could have been pretty fucking good. Guess what they could have done? Instead of immediately showing us this entire place, giving us a tour of this damn thing, how about you lean in, like you just kind of said, to the mystery? Make this bordello a bordello of mystery. Don't make it some like. I almost feel like we have to kind of say here, like, can we all agree on this that there has to be at least a little bit of comedy put in here? I mean, just the outfits of these women are like really, they're kind of like laughable. I feel like if this movie just took a different approach to this whole thing, I feel like it's a good concept on paper. I just don't feel like it when you overexpose not just these women actually, which is a whole other thing to talk about, but this whole bordello, it's like you don't have anything to be scared of. There's no horror here. You know, I feel like it's just such a missed potential, and I don't know what they were thinking exactly. Anybody involved in this, I feel like should have just said, hell, you could be the janitor of the fucking set, and you should have said, guys, reshoot this damn movie and make it a fucking mystery because it sucks. Because it really does. I kind of feel this way because it just nothing really clicks well, and there is a lot of filler because if it just didn't overexpose this damn thing, it could be this much grander story than it kind of is made out to be in this film.
I
Yeah,
also wanna.
yeah. You go ahead, BD.
No, I was also gonna highlight the fact. Did anybody scratch their heads at the fact that so fake ass bootleg Joel Osteen is embezzling funds over to this bordello, right? They got a relationship going on, and he apparently knows who Lilith is. Yet when they went to the strip club, he was acting like fucking Steve Urkel, McLovin looking ass, trying to hide and not see any boobies or any streamers. And he goes up to her and he says, "Yo, I thought we were embezzling money for Holy God X. Don't tell me that you're using my money for debauchery." Didn't he know that they were running a bordello? He knows who Lilith is. He might have had an inkling about what business they were doing. So it's a good redemption arc for the preacher. I like it, but at the same time, it's very sort of vague. Like it's very sort of rushed in that you don't really know if he's a sleaze bag. You don't know if he's kind of a misunderstood guy. But it seemed to me that it was pretty clear that the bordello he knew about that's what's going on, and yet at the end they sort of switch his character from being like this mastermind behind the scenes kind of Lex Luthor figure to now all of a sudden he's the victim. That just sort of seemed like a random change. And again, it didn't help the mystery aspect because you could have had part of the mystery being that the main character girl is uncovering, oh yeah, this, ties of the church to the bordello has been going on for a long time. I've read books and stories where, you can have some ancient history with this church and this bordello. No, instead he's just an idiot. He just seems like some kind of Adam Sandler movie type of character that he doesn't think with his head, and then he ended up being in the situation. So I just thought that was random as well.
The way I took it, like the Explorer guy, I don't know if the movie ever expounded on it, but I think he probably approached the preacher, and the whole Explorer guy's motive was that he wanted Lilith to control her. Like he went out of his way to resurrect her so he can control her, and then he broke the fucking thing, the very thing that controls her, because he simps for her, and she does away with him like that, like a fucking moron. So the whole point of tying the church into all of this was so that in case she ever wanted to try to break free, she can't step foot in there without uncovering some issues because it's a church, whatever. But since the key is broken, I guess that gave her some freedom. I don't fucking know. Like the movie never bothers to fucking explain the shit. You have to like piece it together yourself. And that's the most frustrating thing about this movie. I think we've all kind of hinted on this, and I think we're all right on the money here. If they played into a mystery, like a genuine mystery thriller, the horror elements when they were there, the practical effects, kind of like Demon Knight, fucking ruled. I mean, the guy getting his head pulled off randomly by Lilith, pretty cool scene. There's a scene involving a death of like a filmographer and some other men, like early on in the movie. Those death sequences were fucking gnarly. We could have had more of that as kind of like a dungeon crawler into the bordello. We could have had that kind of movie, similarly to Demon Knight. That felt like a dungeon crawler in a way. We could have had that vibe here again, but then again, I still think that probably wouldn't have helped this movie all said and done because people would have been constantly comparing it to how similar it felt to Demon Knight. So I can see wanting to do something different in terms of narrative and story structure, but when you don't have an interesting or compelling story, when you don't have plot lines that matter all that fucking much, or are just too confusing or dropped the moment they're introduced, so it feels like it's pointless, you don't really have the capture in the engagement of your audience. And that's how I really think that this movie really killed the steam of the Tales from the Crypt Presents movies, because after this movie, y'all, the film franchise basically died, right? They had a third script known as Ritual, and this is the final movie. I have it on the collection here because it's been out of print for so many years and it's really expensive. I've already told you all about that. I have on this collection here, Ritual. They had the movie. Bordello of Blood bombed so hard, they sat on this script and did nothing with it. Years later, Miramax bought the script, took out all the Tales from the Crypt influence out of it, and they released it in 2002 overseas as its own movie called Ritual. When it came to North America in 2006, they retroactively added Tales from the Crypt stuff back into it and promoted it that way. They even filmed a new scene with a new Crypt Keeper puppet to insinuate that this was a Tales from the Crypt movie to market it that way because people on the internet knew that this was the long lost Tales from the Crypt 3. And this is the movie y'all didn't get to see because of how hard it is to find online. Very, very short, brief description of this movie here. The story is essentially about this white family in Jamaica. Because if you don't know, this movie is actually a remake of a 1943 RKO movie called I Walked with a Zombie. It's the only Tales from the Crypt film that's an actual remake of a classic movie. Um, this white family in Jamaica has this voodoo phenomenon going on with one of its brothers in the family, and the head brother who kind of owns the land has recruited this doctor woman played by Jennifer Grey, who was phenomenal in movies like Dirty Dancing and Ferris Bueller's Day Off back in the day. This is pre-nose job Jennifer Grey we're talking. In this movie, she's post-nose job, so she's kind of unrecognizable here. But you get a weird-ass plot with this doctor coming down to Jamaica to investigate some voodoo occurrences. You get some weird CGI moments, some weird deaths involving voodoo and shit like that haven't really aged well and are kind of laughably bad. Even though the plot is a little more engaging and a little more coherent than Bordello of Blood, it's pretty much boring, and that's as big as sin. Nothing really happens all that much throughout the plot. You got some forced love connections with the doctor and the voodoo-stricken brother, and some weird recontextualizations at the end that just kind of putter. To give you a rundown, this movie for me is probably like a 3 out of 5 stars. I mean, what's kind of a saving grace for it? It has Tim Curry in it. Tim Curry, he played in Scary Movie 2. He was in Rocky Horror Picture Show. He was in Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. He was the voice of some iconic
Pennywise.
animated characters. He was Pennywise. Um, he even played in Tales from the Crypt's TV show as in one of the better episodes, The Death of a Salesman. He played 3 characters in that in prosthetic work. He did phenomenal there. It's fun to see him here in a kind of like a Walmart dead way, and he's kind of a pervert. It's a definite change up for Tim Curry, but it's fun. Jennifer Grey does pretty much the best performance in this whole movie, and it's undeserved because without her performance, this movie would have been way lower for me. You see, I think his name is Craig Sheffer. I want to say that's his name. Yeah, Craig Sheffer. He's from some things I recognize. I think he was in uh, Hellraiser Inferno. I think he was in some shows that I've seen. I want to say he was in Bones. I don't know if that's him though. Could be mistaken, but yeah, Craig Sheffer. He was okay here. And you see a couple of the people you might recognize from is pretty much like the other voodoo or I guess New Orleans esque themed episodes that the Tales from the Crypt show had involving voodoo. It does nothing new with the idea. There's nothing special about it, but it doesn't get too much wrong. And I don't know. I think if y'all watch this, y'all either would just be whatever with it or probably outright hate it, knowing y'all. So I'd give this maybe like a 3 out of 5 stars, which for anthology horror is not good. That's like they're getting on the side where I just don't care about it. But yeah, but that's where the Tales from the Crypt franchise kind of ended, and nothing has come out since then. There's been attempts to revive Tales from the Crypt in like the TV show realm. There's been people like M. Night Shyamalan that want to make a film franchise out of it, but the franchise is having some issues with rights and all that, getting the Crypt Keeper back. Recently, there was a fan reading of the lost script Dead Easy, but I have yet to listen to the script because it was for a charity, and they actually had the actors that they had in mind, like Sean Astin from The Goonies. They had a couple other recognizable people that were going to be in the film that just never got to make it because the film got canceled. But they did a reading of it, and you can actually, I guess, find that story online, which is kind of cool. But other than that, there's no more Tales from the Crypt movies. And after seeing what we saw, do y'all want to see maybe a new attempt at making Tales from the Crypt, like come back either as a TV show or as a film franchise?
I feel like the only way they can do it is one, don't make another show. You kind of have to leave that thing in the past. I think, like I kind of stated earlier with Two Fisted Tales, they need to do a creep show type of thing where you kind of break down a film. And I want to do one movie. I don't want to make it this huge franchise. I want it to be one movie where it just has fun, and I want more time and care put into it than you know Two Fisted Tales or either of these Tales from the Crypt Presents movies could do, because love them or hate them, I feel like they really just don't do their job very well. That's kind of how I look at it.
I mean, that's a fair point. And if you've never seen the movies Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror from the 70s, they are anthological style, like Creep Show, like Tales from the Dark Side. And they have some of the more famous stories that got put into season 1 of Tales from the Crypt season 1, like the famous, what is it? What is it? The one with the killer Santa Claus, the slasher one, that with directed by Richard Donner, I think. That one was in that original Tales from the Crypt anthology movie. I would like to see anthology horror come back in that style. Trust me, I'm all for Tales from the Crypt or Creep Show, even, or some of these, maybe a new franchise to get some mainstream attention to come out into theaters, make a 3 to 5 story anthological movie in that old realm that feels like Tales from the Crypt, that feels like Creep Show, and see how it does with a modern audience. I think it's an untested concept. I mean, we've gotten 4 seasons of Creep Show recently, and they've all, we've got a spinoff comic series with Creep Show. Who knows what it could do, but you just have to try it. B, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I was gonna say I probably would want it as an anthology movie format. I would want it to adapt stuff from Two Fisted Tales from comics and make it into movies, because I think that anthology horror is actually preferable for a modern audience because as time goes on and as technology progresses, people's attention span is not what it used to be. People like the idea of multiple stories being in a movie better, and they would like the idea of basically having these different movie segments, it all coming into one, and that would make it more enjoyable. As opposed to like we watched Bordello of Blood, the shit was dragging. Demon Knight has some slow parts. If you have a fun anthology movie and you make it perfectly paced, you make it sort of similar to like something like Body Bags or Creep Show 1 or even Creep Show 2, that it's going to catch people's attention and make it unique, that's the key way to get people on board. And it's going to revive that hype behind Tales from the Crypt as well as appeal to modern audiences, shorter attention spans. So I think anthology is the way to go.
Yeah, and one thing I want to say about these Tales from the Crypt Presents movies as a whole, while it's a very messy, we went over the history of them. It's a very long stretch of time of just messiness, of studio meddling, switching scripts, canceling movies, making some in favor to keep somebody on at Universal, uh, movies bombing so bad that it takes forever to get the third one out. You the third installment itself has its own rabbit hole of bullshit there. But given how messy it was on concept, I do think standalone anthological movies in a series like Tales from the Crypt Presents could be a worthwhile venture if there's quality consistency there. In proof of concept, I said this before we got on, if John Carpenter's Halloween, if it went that original direction they wanted to go and kept it anthological, and they made standalone Halloween themed movies but with different stories every movie, if there was consistent quality there and people knew that going into it, I think it would have been successful. And I do think that the proof of concept could have been here as well. But the problem is quality and consistency movie to movie. It feels like you're on a downward slope each and every film. Arguably, some people might say you start here, then you go down here with Bordello, then you come a little bit up for Ritual, but not too much. Depends on who you are. But the thing is, you don't want to fall down the slope. You want to go up the slope, or you want to maintain that level. You know, and as long as it has that, I would be down for either. But to me, these older movies, all said and done, they don't really capture the charm of the show all that much. Even though, like I said, Demon Knight feels like an episode turned into a film because of the editing choices, because of the choices they made and how they presented the film. It feels honorary to the show, and it feels like a must watch. The other two, Bordello of Blood, the Crypt Keeper stuff feels like an afterthought, right? It doesn't quite fit there, but you can kind of see its influence. And then Ritual is easily the biggest culprit of that because they got rid of it all and then they try to add it back last minute for marketing reasons. And it feels cheap, right? So, it's a give and take for me, but I don't like how some of these movies that feel like episodes drag. You don't need them to be this long. The reason why the old show works so well as an anthology show is because you maybe had probably around 25 minutes to maybe 55 minutes to burn, only an hour of your time. These are requiring an hour and a half. These are feature length things you have to sit through. And when they're just padded out and just filled with nonsense to trot the runtime along, or confusing elements that are hardly touched on because they're trying to aim for a certain time to not go over and over conflate things, just makes it kind of whatever. You know, I'm definitely more on the side of having an anthology film as well, um, because I think that the room there's less room for error, because as long as you have a clear, concise story, kind of in that classic short story realm, like The Haunting Hour or other anthology shows that found themselves when they're writing short fiction to adapt them to screen, you don't have to worry about trying to stretch that crap out. It's going to tell itself. So I'm kind of there with you. Um, Anything else we want to add before we head off?
Um, I guess my final note is I feel like this will piss off a lot of people, but I genuinely think basically none of these should have ever been made. I mean, Demon Knight has its fans, so I can respect it, but anything past that is like you shouldn't have even tried to go there. So the whole meandering in this franchise, it should have been a sign to stop from the get-go, especially after the second movie. I mean, it's just kind of baffling how, a small Two-Fisted Tales became this fucking disaster of a franchise that, still people to this day apparently talk about to great extent because it's just kind of mind-boggling because of how just insane and stupid it is. How as to how everything happens. Say what you want about the films, but yeah.
So, do you think, all in all, do you think Robert Zemeckis' idea to turn Tales from the Crypt into a feature franchise, do you think that was the smart move, or do you think they should have stuck with the show?
Stuck with the show. And they actually, I've heard, apparently, according to reviews, that around the times that these movies were being made, I think it was actually somewhat clear the focus was on the movies. So these episodes in the show would be worse. Don't do that. I don't know how long the show is going with these movies, but or what movies were still running while the show was, but apparently they were. And uh, focus on what you already have. You've already built this fan base for a show. Just do the show. I mean, it's not worth the cash grab to get money. And apparently, this thing, I guess they succeeded. So I shouldn't be the one who talks, but especially after Bordello, it's just like, what the fuck are you doing, man? I mean, I honestly, of course, this is a theory and a speculation, but I honestly wonder if any of these films kind of bombing was actually some of the reason there hasn't been any Tales from the Crypt media in so long. Like I mean, there isn't really anything. I haven't seen media releases for any of these movies below $20-$30, and even the show is pretty hard to find on like DVD or anything unless you're buying bootlegs, which of course there's a whole different discussion topic there. So I don't really know what to say. I need to do my research a bit more. But my, I guess one thing I will say is I'm always open to try new Tales from the Crypt media. If you guys would ever want to do reviews of like you said, like the '70s movie, why not? I'm open to it. I'm open to try it, but I'm definitely, of course, if Ritual comes online, I'm still probably gonna watch it, but I don't have much interest given these two previous films. So that's my final thoughts.
Yeah. BD, you have anything else you want to add?
Robert, you made Monster House, you made Back to the Future, and instead I got stuck with seeing a scene with a woman with 3 nipples and nipple piercings. Fuck you from the bottom of my heart. And that's the end of this review.
So I'm guessing BD also agrees that Robert Zemeckis made a poor judgment call of trying to push Tales from the Crypt into movies.
My man, you are too talented. You have too much of a portfolio to be doing that shit. He should have put all of his resources and focus into the TV show, if anything, and that would have been a smarter decision.
If y'all don't know what happened after Bordello of Blood, that came out in '96. By 1997, the final season was moved over to the UK. After being in the US for 6 seasons, they started filming over in the UK, and they finished the final season. And the final season was completely shot there. Actually, the last episode was fully animated, and it had so much negative reception, especially after Bordello of Blood, that it became the final season. So this is like right in the tail end, especially the two main movies we talked about, Demon Knight and Bordello of Blood. This came out right at the pinnacle of the popularity, and then it almost killed it as soon as it brought it to the films. Um, I have to agree. I think it was kind of a mistake to go this direction, especially for this franchise. I'm not saying that it couldn't have worked for another franchise. I mean, look what happened to Creepshow. Anthological movie turned into a TV show. It worked surprisingly. Well, it's because anthology shows have proven time and time again that they're more popular in that frame than they are in the movies. Now, here's the thing. Like you brought up, BD, we're in a new stage where, especially in horror, these long, epic storytelling, these trilogies, people are getting more and more pissed off at the idea because they usually fumble the bag by the middle movie, by the end movie. People just want one and done, short and sweet stories. Maybe we can see Tales from the Crypt rise from the ashes. Maybe we can see John Kassir revive the Crypt Keeper in some fashion. I mean, the closest thing we got to a revival years ago was when Paper Cuts temporarily acquired the IP in the comics. And they started putting out some new content for Crypt in the comics temporarily. I think they put out like 6 volumes of new stories and then fizzled out again. But I would love to see the IP come back and revive its glory days and pick up some other stories they never got to make because maybe back in the day they just didn't have the technology or budget to do that they do now. And make it with heart. And I think people would respond well to it. I do think a Crypt revival, given the success of Creepshow, would do well. So that's my thoughts. To close this out, like I said early on, please go sub up the Horror Tavern and Metal Horror Bruce. They are great fellows. I appreciate them for staying on for an hour and 45 minutes for this special. But hey, we had lots of fun talking about this little niche franchise and our thoughts on it. Let us know down in the comments section if you've seen all these films before, if you're a fan of this franchise. What did you think about these movies? What do you think the legacy of them means? Do you think they should have been made or not? Do you want to see a revival potentially come out of this? We all want to know. Until next time, take care and have a good one.
Just